Hi everyone. It's good to be in Bath for the first time. Uh, to be honest, to wake up every day and to remind myself that the humanity has not failed is becoming more difficult. Every time I open the news, or to learn that part of the family has been killed. Just last week, 8 men of my family member have been killed while evacuating in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, which was marked uh, safe area. But I would like, because I would really hate it if I forget, I would like to mention my friend Hala Saleh. Now, when I started, and my work started getting recognition from local or international platform, you might think that my first painting that was sold, it was sold to a British or to American, but it was in fact sold to a Palestinian woman from the Gaza Strip who believed so strongly in my work since my early beginnings. And she looked at it and she said, "Look, I cannot afford to pay much, but I know one day you will be an international artist." She sent her daughter to be an artist, and we were planning to get together to speak further about art, but unfortunately Israel had a different say. Hala and her family evacuated to Zawaida, which is also in the southern part, and she was killed with her daughter who wanted to become an artist. She was an avid reader, she was a great writer, but an art lover, but most importantly, she was a person who gave a lot of positivity to everyone who passed by. So I wanted to remember and to mention her name because she deserves this recognition, because she truly supported me till the very end of her life. To grow in the Gaza Strip, I was born in 1999, and life was not very easy. But I think I had the honor of my life to be a woman born and raised in the Gaza Strip, because if I was not born and raised in the Gaza Strip, I wouldn't have become an artist, which has given me a purpose of life, which is to paint, reflect, and to be part of the storytelling. But I was only one member of a very vibrant art community that was thriving and surviving despite of the lack of art material, and also despite of the siege that has killed any communication between the artists and art practitioner with artists from the West Bank, for example. So we were trapped in this one big prison, but the art scene was booming. I remember in 2016, we would have to choose whether to go to a reading event or to an exhibition. So it was like, it's like the level of exhibitions and the level of interest that were from the young artists to become an artist and creatives was unlike anything I saw before. So art was a language that a lot of us as young people sought in a place where hope was very difficult to find. So I was influenced by my upbringing as a young person in a family that had a lot of love and passion to art. My uncle Muhammad Musallam was an art professor and educator at Al-Aqsa University, and who really have given me like a very harsh but very important foundation of art and what it is to be an artist. I remember in one of the wars I witnessed, his art studio was bombed. It was not bombed, but soldiers, they took his house in northern Gaza Strip as a place to stay in. So what they did to break into his studio, which was very well closed, they threw a grenade inside the studio, which shattered all his art collection from when he was a student at An-Najah University in Nablus. So seeing the sculptures being shattered and seeing every piece of a painting being shattered, I saw him going back to work and planning on his next painting. And for me as a young, I was just watching and I was like, how are you still doing this? They just killed your art collection. And he was like, there's no place in the world where I would want to be an artist like I want to be an artist in the Gaza Strip. And my uncle, he's one of the traveling artists who had exhibitions all across Europe and the USA, but still chose to be in Gaza to make art. So my story with art was a passion since I was very, very little. But I remember vividly In 2008, I was going to my school, and I was just starting to do my final exam, and suddenly it was so surreal, I cannot forget it. The teachers broke into the classes asking everybody to leave. And that was the first time I heard the word harb, which means war. And my mom picked me up, and for me, the only thing is like I studied for my Arabic exam, I want to do it. And then it was a new reality. But it was not only a reality, it was the life that was lived after 2008, which was pretty much attacks after attacks after attacks. So in 2008, I witnessed the first Israeli attack on the Gaza Strip. Going back to school, no mental health assistant. You are, as an 8-year-old, go move your life. Trauma, I learned about trauma when I was 18. I learned about PTSD just a couple of years ago. So we had no assistant or no help for anybody to say, like, you've been exposed to this level of trauma which will disrupt your growth. So we kept going back to school. In 2012, it was the second Israeli attack. So when I think about my life, I think about it in terms of wars, not in terms of years. So I'm like 5 war old, because of every time you grow older, and every time you grow and you just understand reality and absorb it even in a deeper level. So this painting, it was one of the earliest pieces I did after the 2014. It was 52 days, and it was the time I witnessed a Palestinian body being torn off by an airstrike. She was a woman who was a neighbor in front of my house. And I've known her all my life, and suddenly to see her as parts and as body parts, that was a shocking reality. Although being exposed to a lot of imagery through digital, etc., but to see it in front of you was different. So art was my way. Art, I was like, from my uncle and what he told me, art is a way of escaping. So art was for me a form of escaping the reality in a time where speaking of your emotions is a luxury. But it's also the time where you know that your parents are not gonna protect you. And I think of it deeply, like how it is for a parent to not be able to protect their children, especially as now, like thousands upon thousands upon thousands of children and parents and are being killed by Israel. So I started my journey in 2014, which was a very dark beginning. But indeed, art gave me this purpose. Like, I wanted to express myself. But when I came online, and to be honest, I had a huge following since the beginning. It was only my mom. And I would, every time I finish a piece, I show it to her, and she would give me a big opinion. This is bad. Go do something else. So it was, my mom was the only critique back at the time. And she had such a great eye in art, but she was also a poet and a writer herself. So, like to speak, this is also a self-portrait, and it was, yes, you might see it as a sad painting, but I was an angry child. I was really angry because I wanted to have a life. And I remember we had, especially after the siege in Gaza, like electricity, and having a full day of electricity was something that we didn't exist with. So you would have a full day without even seeing a light. So I was in a dark room in my room, and the only light that was there was the moon. So the moonlight was enabling me to see things around me. So my surrealistic brain was like, I wish the moon would move closer so I could see. So it was like, when you have this deep urge to live and to have electricity to study and to pursue your life, and then you think of nature as the only escape. But this painting I did during the Great March of Return. And during this time, we really felt as young people we had a role, and and there was a purpose, like we are protesting because we truly want to be free, and we truly wanted to break from this prison that has suffocated every single one of us. Like stories of a cancer patient who couldn't get a permission The story of Marah Diab, she was only 6 years old. She managed to get medication in Israel, but her parents were not allowed to accompany her to her journey, and she died once she made it to the hospital. So this tactic of like preventing the children to be accompanied by their parents, which is something that we see right now, like several cases of cancer patients are able to leave but their parents aren't, which would minimize the chances of their survival as children who are very vulnerable. So it's a painting inspired by Picasso, indeed, The Child with a Dove. But I remember the boy during the Great March of Return. The Israeli sniper would throw a lot of tear gases, which has killed many protesters. So this boy, he has invented an onion, like he came with an invention that if he put an onion inside the mosque, that would absorb the tear gases and he would survive. So this boy was helping his father farming, etc. And this is how the idea came. So I wanted to remember this boy and to remember, like, why would a child even think of a way of survival? You know, why would a child who should only think of what they want to be in the future think of how to just pass a day without being killed? Until now, we see a lot of the children, they take a huge burden into securing the water and food to their parents who are staying in tents. So over 1 million children who grew up deprived of all their life necessities, remember the rage and anger they will grow up with. And no one will ever be able to look into their eyes and say, no, you cannot be angry. Because how can anybody dare to blame a child who has all his life taken away, if not his limbs, his hands, because the Gaza Strip has the biggest number of amputees at the moment. So this painting I did about my grandmother's house because I was really influenced. So maybe most of you are familiar with the Gaza Strip map, which shows the destruction with red dots. And when I looked at the red dots and how statistical it looks and how cold it looks, but within every red dot, there was a family, there was a home, and there was a social life, and there was a brick upon a brick being built by the sweats of decades of work by the Palestinians. And one of these houses that did not survive was my grandmother's house, which also had another collection of my uncle, but other collection of Palestinian artists like Fathi Ghabn, who till the very end of his life was only demanding one thing from this world, which is to breathe. He couldn't exit the Gaza Strip in time, and he passed away because he was not able to have a machine to bring oxygen to him. So my grandmother's house was the first place I saw art. And it was mostly posters. Beside my uncle, it was more abstract, but I was more into portrait art. And it was the first time I saw posters of Van Gogh, the sunflower, and I saw it in London the other day, and I was like, I met my younger self who was very excited about any visual image. But also the dancers by Edgar Degas, and a lot of posters that my uncle used to collect from his trips. But also in every house you would find photos of either people who've been killed, shuhada, martyrs, or people who are prisoners, or people who had to flee Gaza for a better life. So my grandmother's house had many pictures of all my uncles who needed to leave Gaza for a better life. So it was a house that had a huge level of feelings and warmth and art, but it was a house empty of people except my grandparents. So in 2016, I had an invite. After my solo exhibition in Gaza, I had an invite from Bristol. And we have people from Bristol Museum here. And I was invited to have a solo exhibition. That was maybe the happiest day of my life. Like for me, from like from my room to Gaza to travel outside of Gaza was for me extraordinary. And I was like, I went to my dad and I told him, look, I'm going to travel. And he was like, what's going on? Because, you know, you live in a prison, so the idea of traveling is so far away from you. And I was like, look, there's people from Bristol who are willing to do and hold an exhibition for me. And I would love to be present with my work. And he was like, don't be silly. You know, patients of cancer are not able to travel and are dying of their sickness. And you think the Israelis will let you go because of an exhibition. And that was enough for me to have no ambition of leaving the strip. But one way that we could do it is shipping my art painting, like to ship my paintings through the mail to Bristol. And I was like, at least if I'm not able to be there, at least my paintings go. And then I went to this mail office and I had this roll of paintings and I told him, I want to ship this is the address, Palestine Museum, Bristol. And he was like, are the paintings political? I was like, what the hell is that? I was only 16, I didn't, you know, have idea what is political. But I guess, yeah, they were quite political now. But, so I had a lot of anxiety about whether there's really, like, mail office will view them political or not. I just wanted them to reach to Bristol. So this painting was made during this time of having an opportunity and not being able to go. And this is what opened my eyes into freedom. Like, wait, you as an artist, you can travel and you can be in with your paintings. So it just deepened my level of injustice and oppression, and I just want to leave. So it built like a reverse psychology. Like, now if I'm not able to travel, I'll just create a way. So it was a local newspaper that I used for the face of the women, as a way, like, we're not only statistics and we're not only numbers. Like, I had a dream of traveling for my show, but there's many other people who had a dream of pursuing education, of leaving, of exploring the world, of doing their masters. So I painted us, the 2 million people, as birds inside the cage, and still linking to the idea of freedom, which is within the suitcase. So I managed to leave, and that was a very big thing in my life. To not only leave and to break from the Israeli siege after months and months of waiting, but also to break from like a society which really told me you cannot travel alone as a young girl. And to be honest, I hustled so much when I traveled, and it was just very, like, my idea of freedom was very different from reality, because as a Palestinian, I just realized, like, no, freedom is not crossing a border. Freedom is much bigger than this. And freedom is when you are free and when your people are free. So in 2021, I managed to go back, and I was stuck in Gaza for almost a year. But within this year, I witnessed the 2021 Israeli attack on Gaza, which happened in May. And for me, having this after many years since 2014, it triggered everything that I moved on from. And I remembered the scene of my little sister running into my mom. And then I had to paint this, because this is my mom and this is us as siblings running into her. So this painting is called The Mother, and it depicts, and I was making this painting as the house was shaking constantly by the bombardments. But I was like, even if they bomb me now, at least I will paint this painting, because it will be a witness of one of the atrocities of this occupation. So during this time, I did this painting, giving birth in a prison cell. And it was after the story of Anhar Dik, who was a Palestinian woman. She was pregnant in her final month, in her 9th month. And she was in a solitary confinement. She was put into prison by the Israelis. And she was almost giving birth, and she was in a very horrible situation. Not even a mattress, not even proper medical care, and nothing. So she wrote a very long letter addressing the international community. And there was a huge pressure to let her give birth outside of the prison. and she was able to leave shortly before her labor. But when I look at this painting, it's very relevant because dozens of thousands of women in the Gaza Strip are pregnant, and a lot of them needed to have C-section without any anesthetics, and some of them couldn't even bear the pain of having C-section, that they passed away. Plus, the numbers of women who've been killed inside the fetus, inside of them, is a footage that you might have seen many, many times. So I did this also after the 2021 attack, and if you allow me, I will just read the script. So this painting I did, and I wrote this script. It was also in May 2021. And I said I wouldn't have paid enough attention to animal life in Gaza if I hadn't had a small silver fish I named Shafa, meaning healing. In a small aquarium in my home, Shafa helped me see relationships between humans and animals in a new way. Recently, I saw a young boy and a horse framed by a breathtaking sunset. The scene triggered memories of 4 young Becker children killed by an Israeli naval gunship in 2014 while playing football on the beach. As I drew closer to the boy and the horse, I realized that he was feeding the horse and that both looked extremely fatigued. Another day, I walked into a small pet shop and saw a funny, colorful parrot, twittering and whirling in a small cage. For me, the encaged bird embodied the oppression of all living beings in Gaza and the beauty and talent slowly dying from the constant tension of siege and occupation. During recent bombardments, I thought of all the animals being terrified, badly injured or killed as I saw buildings crashing to the ground. My small fish, Shafa, didn't survive these bombings. The noise and violent shaking of our house traumatized her beyond endurance, spotting her silvery body with red marks, internal bleeding. I stood by heartbroken and unable to help until she died. So, thank you, Hu, for talking about the book. And also after 2021, I think my trip to Gaza has really transformed me into even bigger purpose of storytelling, which I see it as a form of resistance. Because unfortunately, a storyteller after one another is being killed, and one of them is Dr. Rifat Al-Arair, who I had the honor to work with before he was killed on the book Light in Gaza to do the cover of this book. And who was the poet who wrote, "If I must die, you must live to tell my story. If I must die, let it be a tale." So this book grew out of desperation. There is absolutely no children's book about the Gaza Strip or a child who survived the war. And growing up very close to the library of Al-Qattan Foundation, I have read numerous books, but neither of them has shared a story similar to mine. And that even deepened the sense of isolation that we as Palestinians in Gaza have lived. So this book has been translated to several languages and has been a true Gaza story of a young girl having a dream and couldn't fulfill it, but one day she does. So, yeah. So if you see that many colors, I no longer paint with colors. So my palette has changed drastically into black and white. When I came just prior to the 7th of October to London, after moving to the Gaza Strip, I moved out through the Israeli checkpoint. And I couldn't interact or see colors. In fact, I was like, it was the first time I ever witnessed a genocide from outside because I was always inside. But it was my family who had to survive 6 months of the genocide, evacuating from a place to another under bombardments. And some of the family members have not, unfortunately, made it to life. But this was the very early pieces I did in my school, Central St. Martin's. And it's called Prematurely Stolen. And for me, it depicts it's like an example of a wider examples of the brutality and the barbarism of Israel, which has prevented the premature babies inside a Shifa hospital from having oxygen to live and survive. And unfortunately, one after the other, from these premature babies who were not even named by their families, to pass after the other, and the doctors were bleeding, like even to international world, it's like, please bring oxygen for these incubators so these children can survive, and nobody listened. So another incident happened in a Nasser hospital where the families were forced to leave to the southern part, leaving the premature babies in the beds. And when people went back to the hospital, they only found the remaining of the premature. They only found the tiny skeleton of these babies, which have been left to die because Israel decided so, and because they have all the impunity of the world to do and perform what it wants, even after the ICJ and ICC. This painting is based on a testimony of a child who said she saw birds eating the dead bodies of people who were not even had the luxury of being buried because their families and their loved ones were forced to flee before even bury them. And I remember one of the stories of a mother who insisted on carrying the body of her son, and she was shot. And that's one of the many stories where even the burial of the bodies have been prohibited. So I would like to end with the final piece. No, not the final piece, but I would like to mention Mohammed Samak Raqi, who was a colleague inside Tamer Institute, which was an institute for young people to cultivate and enhance their artistic practices. And Mohammed Samak Raqi, he was one of the artists who said, it's my responsibility to document what's going on inside Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital in videos, in drawings and photos. And Mohammed Samak Raqi, what he did, he was only 24, but in a way to make the children escape the bombardments and escape this strong motion of horror, he played with them in a circles. So he built circles of children and he played with them to make them distracted. And unfortunately, when Al Baptist Hospital was bombed, he was killed, so as the children he was trying to distract from this genocide. Mohammed Sami Raqi, he was a very hopeful and a very active member of the art scene and the art community in the Gaza Strip. He had big ambition, and sometimes when I paint, I'm reminded of my colleagues who couldn't make it, and I feel extremely guilty to be able to continue and paint and go to an art school, and to be able to even buy art material when there's absolutely no art materials left, while they have not been granted the right to even live and to make their dreams come true. Hiba Zaqut, I never met her, but she was a Facebook friend. And you know, while she was alive, I was extremely fascinated by how prolific she was. So every time she posts, I was like, you know, I'm very inspired. I also have to paint and produce as much as she did. Hiba Zaqut painted cities that she would never have been able to visit. She painted Jerusalem, she painted Ramallah and Nablus, she painted a lot of portraits of Palestinian women to celebrate the culture and celebrate the Palestinian identity. And she also said in one of the interviews, my art is a message to the world, but the world has failed her, so as her children, because all of them are under rubble. So this painting I did in London, in fact, while my family was still in the Gaza Strip. This is the end, so I'm sorry to talk a lot, but this painting is 5-meter mural, and this is the biggest piece I've ever done. I was just doing like few sketches here and there, and I was like, I cannot do this because I have so much things to say that I need to go with a larger scale. This painting reflects many aspects of this Israeli genocide: cultural genocide, religious genocide, and also the journalism attacks, as well as the artists being murdered. And on the core and the heart of it is the brutal experience of displacement, which is the biggest in the history of Palestine. Over 2 million Palestinians have been forcibly displaced, within the Gaza Strip, which is very tiny, 365 kilometer. And one of the scenes that we've seen repeatedly is how donkeys and like donkeys and horses carried the furniture of entire families to the unknown. And one of the families are my family, who also had to go and to find a place to stay in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. If you look at the top part of this painting, above the boy who is horrified, there's a scene of, there's a corpse, a little corpse of a body. So even because of the level of targeting of ambulances, people started putting the dead bodies of Palestinians on top of the cart, like horses and donkeys. And if you look at this side, you will see Rashad al-Shawwa Cultural Center, which is the most important cultural center. It's more like the Tate Britain of the UK, but for me it means much more. Which has also been bombed, but underneath it there's numerous numbers of murals painted by female and male artists who were always, it was more speaking of the spirit of the city, which is the spirit of wanting to break from the occupation. It's a spirit of returning to our land, because I'm a refugee, so as many Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And you could see Handala, which is the cartoonist by Najil Ali, which is a 10-year-old child who turned his back to everyone because of the sense of disappointment and failure. And of course, the scenes of naked men who have to be forced naked and executed by the Israeli soldiers. And we've seen many, many scenes, especially in a Shifa hospital, where like hundreds of men, even in the north and the south part, were forced to be naked. And it was very difficult to paint this. If you saw the kites on the other side of the painting, for me this is Rifat al-Ara'ir, Dr. Rifat, and inspired by his poem, "If I must die, you must live to tell my story." And part of the poem was the kite. And what part of London protest, they were writing his poem in like on a shape kites and using them in a protest. Because Rifat al-Ara'ir, he was not an ordinary person, he was extraordinary. You can never ask a writer or a creative from Gaza about their career or their ambition without mentioning Dr. Rifat. And he was chased from a place to another till he was assassinated at his sister's house. And later on, his daughter was killed. And also the St. Bosphorus Church. It was one of the places that has inspired my paintings. I went there on a school trip with my mom, who was a teacher, and her students. And it was my first time I get to see the iconography. And I have over 100 paintings where there is a golden halo around them. And I get questioned, "Are you Christian? Like, why do you paint halos?" And I was like, I was inspired by what I saw growing up. And Al-Amari Mosque, one of the oldest mosques in the world, have also been targeted. So as the Central Archive building, and Basha Palace Museum. So, and I have to say, this is not only our loss as Palestinian, but your loss as well. Like, to lose such an important landmarks and historical sites that are dated from the 30th century. This does not belong. These sites are universal. So if it affects us, it also affects you as humans. But so thank you. That's it.
Can I ask you about, because when I read that you left the Gaza Strip the day before, I thought, my immediate thought was, she must suffer terrible what we call survivor's guilt. And you did mention that. Can you say a bit more about that and how you struggle with it and how you deal with it?
Well, I just paint. I wish I could have a more profound answer, but I wake up to paint and I sleep to paint. And for me, I might be illusioned by what art is, but I know that after this genocide ends, photos will disappear. And what will not disappear is all forms of documentation. And my form of documentation is through painting. And the same way I look back at 2021 and 2014 and I see work, I know that art just plays a huge role. And this is something that Gaza taught me, of how art should always be there. Not only to escape through hard and negative emotions, but also to always be a witness. And one other aspect is that I'm very, very touched by the Nakba. I never witnessed it back in 1948, but what gave me this depth of emotions and this depth of connection with the generation who've suffered the forcible displacement was paintings of Sliman Mansour and Nabil Anani and Tamam al-Akhal. All these artists who survived the Nakba has documented it. So not only has it worked as a form of documentation, but as a form of connecting generation with another generation, which history alone cannot do. And in the Gaza Strip, like, a lot of the curriculums that we were taught, a lot of it was dedicated to literature and short stories and novels and also visual art. And one of the, like, on a different note, when we did art schools, art classes, it's irrelevant, but I just feel like saying it. We used to study like art, especially the Palestinian art and a bit of art history, through books that were only black and white. So I just opened, okay, Tamam al-Akhal, she's a Palestinian. She fled Jaffa because she was forced with her family out. And it was black and white. So my all understanding, and it was just ink was expensive, so they did it all black and white. So for me to see colors and to see you could just do like a huge loss through colors could really be very like effective. So I do it for Gaza actually. I do it for the next generation, and I do it because we should never forgive or forget. And I do it so the next generation, even the ones who have not witnessed it, will remember what have happened and to continue fighting, because we should never give up fighting till Palestine is free. I know it's too difficult to even say it, and among this huge loss, but it's a thought that we should never relinquish. Yeah.
So one of the things that I think my experience in this country is that people are switching off from the news, or they get fatigued, I can't imagine what that's like for you, to see people in our society getting fatigued by, if things go on for a week or so or more. What would you like me to say to people in my life that is not captured in newspapers or on the news, that might just make a difference and wake people up out of their fatigue and the hubris and the comfort that we have? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does, but I'm just thinking, because to wake up is a choice. Yeah. You will not force anybody to wake up if they don't want to wake up. And my message is, don't let your privilege make you blind. Because the level of privilege you guys have is extraordinary. Like every time I need to cross border, or every time I need to apply for a visa and receive rejection, or come back and you're not eligible, the level of the hustle that I have to hustle in my daily life, it just makes me want to disappear. And I see other art colleagues and art students, it's like, oh, I'm just going to Paris to see an exhibition. I was like, wow, you guys. So I think it's all a moral question. And I'm sure that those people who refuse to look and who refuse to interact or say something, I'm sure they don't sleep comfortably. I like to believe that humans have some good conscience in them. But silence is complicity. Yeah. For me, silence is being pro-Zionist.
It felt like a good question to ask, but I think that's probably exactly the right answer, to not look away.
But everyone has a role to play. If some people refuse to listen, there are other people who are willing to hear and to have a conversation and to ask difficult questions. So I think there should be resilience in the way the fight happens. And you know, somehow, like when I see coming from a very tiny place like the Gaza Strip and seeing how the whole world is shifting from this tiny place, I was like, wow, how powerful we are. You know, like Gaza has changed the world and continues to do this, and I'm proud to be from a place that is fighting colonization every single day. By just existing, like for me existing and living and waking up, I'm just fighting colonization, and for me this is an honor. So.
Yeah, I can see that art would, and this art is really powerful and a different way of communicating what's happening to see to what we see on television. Who else needs to see this and this art, and how does it need to be conveyed to sort of drive more positive political action?
So how can art play a positive action in change?
Yes, but who needs to see this, and how can we get?
Well, like, yeah, when I paint, I don't paint for Zionists to see. I paint for humanity. And you know, like, one thing, I know my answers are a bit fragmented, but how it's totally normal to be in my situation. You know, the more dehumanized we are, the more I just want to spend more time in my studio. Because the more dehumanized we are, somehow it makes me think, like, wow, there's some arrogant and ignorant people who refuse to see the humanity of 2 million people in the Gaza Strip. Like how arrogant you could be to see that another 2 million human beings are less worthy of life than you are, because they happen to be brown and Muslim. But you know, when you are an artist, I just personally speaking, I don't paint for a certain audience. I paint for whoever the destiny will look into my art, and if it makes a change, it's great. If not, then it will continue to be a form of documentation. And to be very honest, art cannot make political change. To be can art cause a ceasefire? No, it cannot. It has always been part of any social change. The artists and activists create work to express themselves and to have a voice. So for me, my art is the way I have a voice. So if I don't paint, I don't have a voice. So it's more like to speak and to have a platform is to be an artist. But will it free Palestine? Inshallah.
I want to just ask you, you're probably aware that several months ago there was art in one of the children's art from Gaza. Children from Gaza had art in one of the London hospitals, and it was taken down because some people found it offensive. I was just interested to know, from your personal experience, what your experience of, or what the reaction is to your art here, and how easy it is for you to find a place within the art scene in London and Britain, and so just from your personal perspective, and maybe also more widely, how Palestinian art is viewed and treated in this country.
I mean, some people need time to process that I'm an artist, I'm a woman, and I'm from Gaza. So even at Central St. Martin's, it's like an art school, it's one of the top. And when I said Gaza, they all were shocked. And when I say I'm an artist, they were shocked. So I'll just know that being who I am and just expressing freely my views without any censorship, it's gonna have some form of controversy, which I also witnessed in some exhibitions. I've really had some really interesting interactions, some aggressive, some peaceful, some, but during this time and during this shift of public opinions, there's a huge demand for artists to speak. and for art venues and art festivals to welcome especially visual artists to speak, which I think is very positive. But I do feel like with every invitation there should be like some tangible change, some tangible action that people could go home with, which is this urge to take an action. So art alone cannot really, the viewer, if they see an art, they need to ask themselves, how am I part of this and how I can make a change? So it's asking people for, like in this painting, for example, like maybe in a separate note, there is a sniper looking at you, at every one of you. And it's also an attack. It's like, this could be you. So this sense of like how art bridges the gaps between people and the gaps between us is like, I think art can only do this, is to really bring us together to transform and to make a change, and to also like simply, if I'm not safe, you are not safe. So yeah, it's been I would say mostly a really good experience. Yeah.
I should just say that I think the complaint to the hospital was by UK Lawyers for Israel, or a similar group, and they said that members of the public had been offended, but they never actually provided any evidence.
Yeah.
I think there is no evidence that any members of the public complained.
Imagine how fragile it is to be threatened by a child drawing. This is so funny.
Presumably, your family in the past generation came from elsewhere than Gaza, like many people in Gaza. Are you able, in your painting, to reflect that Gaza is not a specific situation, but it represents the wider problem of the displacement of Palestinians and as you said, the Nakba. Your paintings are showing very much the Gaza and the suffering, but are you able to celebrate a bit of your background outside of Gaza? Because I think the world needs to know that when you talk about a prison, that the people of Gaza, most of them are not Gazans by choice. Can you express the Nakba in your paintings, or don't you feel that that's what you should be doing?
Well, I had a series of work that expressed the Nakba, and also I had a painting that reflected my grandparents' journey in 1948, and the way I had this painting that I called What Remains. And in fact, it's a story of my great-grandfather. He had a White House, not the one in DC. It was in Aljora village. And it had a small yard where he planted and he used to harvest olive and oranges. And unfortunately, in 1948, he also had to flee and he made it to Gaza. But then when my uncle, as a nursery student, went back and he was able to know the location, he said, there is no house, but there's only the water well that my great-grandfather has told me about. So there was there was a well of water that my great-grandfather used to use for harvesting, and there was also next to this water well there was a nail where he put his scarves while he was harvesting, when he rested, etc. So all of these stories, like when I learned about them, I was like really shocked, and I also portrayed this in my work. But yeah, so I did some, but for me, like, I was not it was not my choice to be a Gazan, but if I had the choice, I would always choose to be from Gaza. So as many people, like, there's something about this place that draws you in. And if you had the ability to visit before 7th of October, it's like an addiction, you'd always want to go back. Because, and this is something that I also celebrated in my previous work, when I used colors. I reflected on the beautiful scene of the sea, which it's the Gaza port, and activities of family getting together, of olive harvesting, of oranges. So a lot of these scenes that I was part of was reflected in my work. which looking back, it hurts, like to look at artwork from a place that no longer existed. It's not only a war against your present, it's a war against your past. And that's why every place that connected us to Gaza has been demolished. The archival center has been demolished, the museums, the cultural center. So it's like they try to uproot you from your own land, but it's a failure. They will never do.
Thank you for sharing tonight. And you've achieved an amazing amount for your age, we're quite similar in age, but you've achieved so much, and it's amazing. And I just wanted to ask, I'm seeing so many leaders speaking out from inside Gaza, from outside Gaza, who are a lot younger than the political leaders, you have to say. Have you found at any point that people have looked down on you, or it's been harder because of your age? Or is it something that you kind of like stepped into and like many other people come from Gaza really spoken up? Basically I'm asking, has people ever spoken down to you because you're younger than some of the other leaders or other people who might be showing you in galleries?
Well, maybe, but I haven't felt it. No, I just felt like with being young, I think it was something celebrated more than like the opposite. It's like, and it makes me feel good, like, oh, you're young and you achieved a lot. It makes me feel good, but I'm more practical. I just, it's more like you have a mission and you do it, and all other details of like age, where you are, location, etc., it becomes something on the side. But to be honest, something I always felt from the inside, that the witness has certain power, that nobody outside Gaza who never lived the atrocities and the bombardments and the true loss of humans and people. So I do feel like to be a witness is not to be a victim, but to be like a true storyteller of what your senses have felt, what my hands, what my eyes, what my ears, what I smelled, the tear gases, the dust. So everything makes a witness an important voice, and that's always why like the work of the Gazan artists who are currently working in the Gaza Strip are extremely important. They are reflecting the life. Ra'id al-Isa, for example, he took his studio. He no longer has a studio, but his tent became a studio. He started documenting the everyday life under a genocide, like two sisters, like the journey of getting water, like people next to the sea. All these scenes have been reflected using charcoals and tea, the pigments of tea. There is also an artist, the humanitarian aids, they have a lot of canned food. So one of the artists, what he did, he emptied and cleaned the canned food, and he created puppets for children. So can you ever defeat these people? No. It's like, this continuing to look ways to survive and to live is extraordinary. So, yeah, and to be honest, like when I have moments of despair, I look at the artists who are currently there and continuing to make work, and I was like, I have absolutely no excuse. So, yeah.
Hey, and thank you. I don't have this question completely clear in my head, so I'll try and get it out. It strikes me that something that Zionists would ultimately like or need would be for everyone to just forget, for society to physically conquer Gaza, and they want everyone to forget Palestinian culture and forget that happened. And one way that can be avoided or very much kicked into the long grass is potentially the sharing of art or memories or culture or any of it. In that sense, from our point of view here, is we're all stuck in Britain, but we're all in Britain. We can't go there physically very easily and do anything. We can potentially share arts and stories and all these kinds of things. I guess I wonder if you see that as a kind of politically viable or worthwhile thing, and if so, do you have any thoughts? So I guess the insisting on sharing memories or culture, or the fact of this culture, this place exists. These people are here. They have lives. They have everything. and yeah, refusing to go along with that being disappeared. I guess I'm asking, does that seem sort of politically worthwhile, and if so, do you have any thoughts on how the kind of parameters are of it, how it can be gone about? I'm sort of talking about, you know, putting art out there. It's a way of making it's both for people to see, it's also for all of those who would like the whole culture to be forgotten, to be cowed by, to be told, no, we're not doing that, we're not going that way. Sorry, that's not much of a question, but...
Well, I'll answer with the biggest of my abilities. I'm just trying to survive, and after 1 year of, seeing a change but not seeing a change, let's say, I do have moments of frustration, and I do have moments of like, the international community, is there something changing? Yes, there is change, but every day we wake up to a massacre. And to be honest, I'm having an extreme difficulty living in two realities. Like living the Gaza reality, which is my reality, given that it's my home, it's where my family still, my relatives, my colleagues, my studio. And between living here as a Palestinian in the West, and it's so confusing to live in these both realities. But one thing I know, which might not, might not answer your question, but I just feel like we should be more disruptive to these institutions. They say, oh, but these protests are hate protests. You're killing my people. Do you want me to love you? For God's sake, do you expect, okay, you're funding Israel, you're selling weapons, you're still continuing to support unconditionally a genocidal state, and you still expect the people to go on the street as peacefully as possible, make it make sense. So if these institutions are not being disrupted, if these people are able to sleep at night normally, then we're not doing enough. I'm sorry. But I just really feel like I wish there could be even more pressure from us, from the people, to really say no. And I do see some positive examples. I see what FAL Action is doing, which is amazing. It gives me hope. I see the encampments that started at Columbia University, and I see, but I'm always reminded of the fact that, there's still people who have to be weighed as 70 kilos as a human being. Remember, when the massacre happened in a mosque, and they couldn't even retrieve one body that was full, that they needed to count the flush into 70 kilos. So people from Gaza started going out and saying, we are not we're not kilos. So imagine this level of depravity from having to say for decades, we are not only numbers to we are not kilos. So I'm really honestly, I'm conflicted, and I just feel like I wish I could do more. But the reality is very frustrating. Especially having personally having a family, but there's also around 100,000 Palestinians in Egypt, which the Egyptian government has not even given a legal residencies to. So we're living a huge question. It's what is the future? So this level of uncertainty that we live is quite serious. Is Gaza going to be reoccupied again? Are these Palestinians going to go back? My family every day they ask me, when are we going back? So it's quite a difficult condition to think of, with so much unclarity and so much instability as well, and yeah. Sorry, I'm not always hopeful, but yeah.
Thank you, Malak, for your brilliant talk. And from those days at the Palestine Museum, your speech and your presence and everything was just flourished. So well done, well done. My question is a little bit of a follow-on from the other one. So, I mean, most of the people in this room, I would think, know quite a bit already about the situation. That's why we're here tonight. And you talked about disrupting institutions and so on. I wonder what you think that might look like, you know, how we could use our privilege, as you mentioned, which is vast, yeah? And secondly, I wonder if you've been asked to speak at any other gatherings or artistic institutions, and whether that's maybe something that we could all go away and put our thinking caps on and find our connections and, you know, nudge institutions to invite you. So,
Well, I'm a bit too angry for art institutions, but I still do, like, I do talks, and I also, you know, I talk about this painting quite a lot, which is also traveling from a place to another. But the question of how to disrupt, I just don't feel, like, I feel like you as people who've been born and raised here and you know the West very well, I think these questions are questions to be asked within yourselves, like, how can we do it? I just came here last year. Like, you know, I know there's way to disrupt. I know you could block, for example, like what Pal Action is doing is like really disrupting, really getting inside the companies, blocking them. So all of these actions is what I'm thinking of. Like in the United States, for example, they disrupted cars from going on. Like all these actions that can really stop the movement of something. Like the Jewish Voices for Peace, they have gone into the capital and they protested with as much power as they could. So, you know, how to disrupt and what to do is something that I would ask you to reflect on and do, but I just honestly believe everyone has a role to play, especially like being taxpayers. Like even in my work, like I do some graphic work, and it's like, oh, you should put trigger warnings. And I was like, there's no trigger warnings for taxpayers. Sorry. So it's... yeah, I wish I could really give a clearer answer, but boycotting is a way. I think I believe in boycott, I believe in sanctions, I believe in divesting. And that's something that I've been really working hard in my school to do. My school, Central St. Martin's, is partnering with the Bezalel Art School to design the Israeli uniforms. So, you know, so it's, yeah, very interesting.
Malak, can I ask you, when you came to Britain to go to Central St. Martin's, what did you hope to learn in your masters? I mean, you're a largely self-taught artist, and your self-expression is a huge amount in you. I mean, what do they have the temerity to try to teach you? Are they teaching you technique or art history, and are they intimidated by how much you have to express?
Well, there's something about the schools, it's like self-directed. It's like you direct yourself. Sorry. But I went there, I was disappointed because, you know, I wanted like, you know, what kind of, like they didn't really offer like a solid academic resources for you, like each student has to go through. So what I do is like I choose what I want. So I've been exploring drawing, painting, printmaking, and animation. And so there's workshops for each medium which you go to, and you have technicians helping you. But what it does is like intellectually it does not interfere with you as an artist. So it's like we facilitate everything that you want, but your art is your choice. And before I was like in my art statement, etc. I was like, I want to do art that is very personal, you know, that about my personal development as an artist, something that is like more personal directed than it is political. But then it's like it didn't happen, and the path has changed. But yeah, being in an art school in the UK just reminds me of how unbothered the art world is. So the more I become involved, the more I feel isolated, because speaking about Palestine is just, it's not like they do not facilitate any, like they do not give any space for any freedom of expression whatsoever. But are they intimidated? Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, it's...
How do you feel about Ukraine? I'm actually quite angry about the disparity of response between Ukraine and Palestine, because you know, the British government is partially responsible for the situation in, or if not wholly responsible for the situation in Palestine, and yet you know, the situation in Palestine is the same situation as the one in Ukraine, and yet you send tanks and missiles to the Ukrainians and train their troops in order to protect themselves. And yet, I mean, this is one of the things I feel most angry about.
Yeah.
What are your feelings on it?
Just like showed us extreme double standards. I mean, one of the aspects, I do have friends who were trying to bring their families from Gaza. They are British nationals. Like, I have a friend who's from Gaza, and his brother, he was homeless in Gaza. He couldn't have any place to go. He was just 18. And he's still fighting 1 year, the Home Office, to let his brother come to this country legally. He's been fighting the government to bring his brother legally, and he's British national. Until now, he was not successful. During the Ukraine war, it was pretty much facilitated. So it just shows the racism of what it is. Like, you are brown, you are Muslim, you're Palestinian. It's very clear, it's very crystal clear of how much there is a huge gap and how much dehumanization there is. So, I mean, like, even in my art school, you know, the very basic I expected is a statement. You know, a statement from the head of school, you know, expressing, you know, some sympathy to the genocide. And they were like, oh, we are against anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. Like, what the hell are you talking about? There is a genocide, already 50,000 people have been killed. But when I opened their website to what the statement they did on Ukraine, it was huge. Plus, they offered full scholarships. They offered even like vouchers for students to go to supermarket to have all their expenses covered. Whereas, as a Palestinian from the Gaza Strip, absolutely nothing. So, and it's an art school, like, which gives you a glimpse of one of many, many institutions of the UK. So I had to confront the school about it, and the response were like, you know, it's bigger than us, we cannot really express our feelings, and we feel for you, but we cannot speak, we're afraid about our jobs, and you know, go look, this is an invite, just don't tell anybody I sent it to you. It's like a protest. So it's, yeah.
Kind of related to that, but I just wanted to ask about your institution. Have you had the experience there of anyone trying to censor your art or accuse you of anti-Semitism or cancel you from events as yet? Has that occurred?
Trying to remember.
I don't know. Just curious.
I would have thought that one picture, which reminds me of Guernica, would have spoken to many of your colleagues at the art school.
Yes, it was like I had it shown in Cromwell Place, and I had my classmates, etc. And some of them, one of my very good friends, she's also a colleague, her name is Farwa. She made an artwork inspired by this painting. So her work shifted with this genocide into making more political work. Just one other student, they did a work, they said all wars are illegal and gave no explanation. So I'm very optimistic. I took it like the war in Palestine is illegal. So the students are slowly shifting, but definitely many of them choose the safer space, which is to not talk about it. Again, they are so privileged, you know, and when I talk to them about it, they say, oh my God, how privileged we are, like we don't even see this. But yeah, it's slowly shifting. But art schools are always very difficult. They are not political as any other art like schools generally.
Martin, I just wanted to say, I'm so sick of the rhetoric that we heard Kamala Harris repeating about Israel has the right to defend itself, and Hamas, what they did was terrible, and they beheaded babies and raped the women. I find it so hard to cope with this media, which all we know is fabricated. How do you cope with it and your fellow Gazans with this rhetoric? And what do you think the way forward is at if we get a ceasefire? How do you see the next stage?
Well, as I expressed before, we're in very much unclarity of what the reality is. Like even there's a question: is ever gonna be a ceasefire? Is Israel ever gonna leave the Strip? So I really wish I could have this vision to read reality. So as many of my colleagues and also writers and analysts, I read what they post every day, and they cannot seem to comprehend what the future holds. But you know, the media, it's not only complicit to genocide, it's enabling it. And that's why I've got surprisingly many, numerous requests from BBC. Can we let's talk to you about your survivor guilt. No, first talk about genocide. Call it genocide. And every time every time they bring a Palestinian, they always have to question them as they are talking with a terrorist. And they are but whether it's always they claim, we claim, we are these suspicious creatures who always have to claim and who always say the wrongs. So the BBC and all these complicit media, I choose to boycott because I refuse to be somebody's guilt erasing. Just a presenter who suddenly had a moment of conscience wants to bring a Palestinian to bring a voice. No, it's either you give me my platform, it's either you give me the platform to speak and talk about, let's talk cultural genocide, or you don't put me in this two sides of this conflict, because it's not a conflict. It's a genocide, and if they refuse to even call it the most basic term, then they are just a Zionist media. So it's just having no compromising whatsoever in a cause which is so noble and very important.